Imagine a place so far north that the sun disappears entirely for months at a time, leaving behind a darkness so complete and so prolonged that it reshapes the entire rhythm of human existence, from the way people sleep and eat to the way they raise their children and think about the passage of time itself. Imagine a settlement so remote that its nearest neighbor, itself hardly a bustling metropolis, sits more than 200 kilometers away, across frozen sea ice and open tundra, a distance that in winter can only be crossed by snowmobile, small aircraft, or sheer determination. Imagine living where temperatures routinely plunge to minus 40 degrees Celsius and below, where the wind carries a cold so penetrating and so absolute that exposed skin can begin to suffer damage within minutes, and where the logistical challenge of simply getting food, medicine, or building supplies delivered from the outside world is a constant, year-round preoccupation for everyone in the community. This is Grise Fiord, known in Inuktitut as Aujuituk, a name that translates with haunting precision as the place that never thaws. And before we travel any deeper into what daily life actually looks like for the people who call this extraordinary place home, if remote and extreme corners of the human world genuinely fascinate you, go ahead and subscribe right now, because today we are going to walk through exactly how life works in Canada's northernmost civilian community, a settlement perched at the very edge of the inhabited world on Ellesmere Island in the high Arctic. Grise Fiord sits at approximately 76 degrees north latitude, a position so far above the Arctic Circle that calling it simply northern feels almost comically inadequate. It occupies a narrow coastal strip along the southern shore of Jones Sound, on an island so large it ranks as the 10th largest island on the entire planet, yet so inhospitable that its permanent human population amounts to fewer than 150 people in total. To put that distance into meaningful perspective, the community sits roughly as far from Ottawa as Ottawa sits from Miami. Yet in terms of infrastructure, accessibility, and the practical realities of daily supply and connection, it might as well exist on a different planet entirely. The nearest community of any kind, Arctic Bay on Baffin Island, lies well over 200 kilometers away, and reaching it requires either a flight aboard a small propeller aircraft or an extraordinarily difficult overland journey across frozen terrain that even experienced Arctic travelers treat with considerable respect. Canada itself is the second largest country by total area on Earth, covering an expanse of nearly 10 million square kilometers from its southern border with the United States, all the way to the northern tip of Ellesmere Island, where Grise Fiord and the even more distant weather station and research outpost at Alert represent the absolute northern frontier of permanent and semi-permanent human habitation in this country. The Canadian Arctic Archipelago, the vast collection of islands stretching across the country's northern reaches, encompasses some of the most extreme, geologically dramatic, and ecologically significant territory found anywhere on Earth. Shaped over millennia by glaciation, permafrost, and the particular slow rhythms of an environment where the margins between survival and catastrophe can shift with terrifying speed when weather conditions change or expected supply shipments fail to arrive. The community of Grise Fiord today is home to somewhere between 100 and 150 residents, a number that fluctuates modestly as families come and go, young people leave for education or opportunity elsewhere, in Nunavut or southern Canada, and occasional new arrivals settle in for work connected to government services, research, or other community needs. This tiny population makes Grise Fiord not only the northernmost civilian community in Canada, but one of the smallest permanent settlements of any kind in the entire country, a fact that shapes absolutely everything about how daily life is organized, from the single small school that serves all children regardless of age and grade level, to the community's relationship with the Nunavut territorial government in Iqaluit, to the particular kind of deep, encompassing mutual interdependence that develops inevitably when so few people share responsibility for sustaining a functioning community in one of the most challenging environments on the planet. To understand Grise Fiord as it exists today, you first have to understand something about why this community came to exist at all, and the answer to that question involves a chapter of Canadian history that remains painful, contested, and deeply significant to the Inuit families who were central to it. The settlement was not founded through any organic process of people choosing a promising location and gradually building a community around it, the way most towns and villages across history have come into being. Instead, Grise Fiord exists because of a deliberate relocation program carried out by the Canadian federal government in the early 1950s, in which Inuit families, many of them from Inukjuak in northern Quebec, were transported by ship to this remote and previously uninhabited location on Ellesmere Island, joined by a small number of Inuit from Pond Inlet on northern Baffin Island. The official rationale offered by the Canadian government at the time combined several considerations: relieving pressure on wildlife resources near Inukjuak, where overhunting was said to be a concern, providing a better life with more abundant game for the relocated families, and, though this motivation was rarely stated as explicitly in official communications, asserting Canadian sovereignty over the high Arctic at a time when the Cold War was making questions of territorial control in the far north feel both strategically significant and geopolitically urgent. Canada, like other Arctic nations during this period, was keenly aware that maintaining effective occupation of its northernmost territories carried real implications for sovereignty claims, and a permanent civilian settlement, even a tiny one, served that purpose in ways that purely military or scientific outposts arguably did not. What the relocated families actually experienced told a very different story from the official optimistic accounts. Many of the Inukjuak families had spent their lives in subarctic conditions and had little preparation for the dramatically harsher environment of the high Arctic, where winters were longer, darker, and colder than anything they had previously known, where the wildlife species and hunting conditions differed significantly from those they were familiar with, and where the social and cultural support networks built over generations in their home communities were abruptly severed and replaced with nothing but the company of a small group of fellow transplants who were themselves struggling to adapt to an overwhelming environment. The promises made to the families before relocation, including assurances that they would be returned south if the experience proved too difficult, were not honored, and families who wished to go home found themselves stranded in the high Arctic without the means to do so. The Canadian government did not formally acknowledge the hardship caused by this relocation program until 1993, when a parliamentary committee concluded that the relocations had been carried out in a manner that failed to adequately inform the participants of what they were agreeing to, failed to follow through on promises made, and caused genuine suffering to the families involved. A formal apology and compensation package for surviving relocatees and their descendants followed in 2008, a belated but meaningful official recognition of the wrong that had been done to these families. For contemporary residents of Grise Fiord, many of them direct descendants of those original relocated families, this history is not a distant abstract matter, but a living, present reality that shapes their relationship with the Canadian government, their understanding of their own community's origins, and their sense of what it means to have built a genuine home and identity in a place that their grandparents and great-grandparents were sent to against their will or under conditions of profound misunderstanding. And yet, built it they have, in the most complete and meaningful sense. Grise Fiord today is a functioning, living community with its own distinct culture, its own local governance, its own rhythms of daily life, adapted with extraordinary skill and resilience to one of the harshest environments that any human community inhabits anywhere on Earth. The people who live there today are not merely surviving in the high Arctic out of lack of alternatives. Many of them have made genuine, considered choices to remain in or return to a community they consider home, drawn by family, by cultural connection, by a relationship with the land and the particular landscape of Ellesmere Island that has deepened over generations, even as the history of how their families came to be there in the first place remains complicated and painful. The population of Grise Fiord is overwhelmingly Inuit, reflecting both the original relocation program that established the community and the broader demographic reality of Canada's high Arctic, where Inuit communities have maintained continuous presence and cultural tradition across this extreme environment for thousands of years. The Inuit are among the most remarkable examples of human environmental adaptation anywhere in the anthropological record, developing over millennia a comprehensive body of knowledge, technology, and cultural practice specifically fitted to Arctic conditions that would be instantly fatal to someone arriving without that accumulated wisdom and the material and social tools it has generated. Contemporary Grise Fiord residents carry this heritage directly and consciously, maintaining traditional practices, passing traditional knowledge to younger generations, and drawing on ancestral understanding of the Arctic environment in ways that remain practically significant to daily life, even as modern technology has transformed many aspects of how that life is organized. The language of daily life in Grise Fiord is Inuktitut, specifically the dialect associated with the high Arctic region, which coexists with English as the language of government, formal services, and broader Canadian connection. Many residents are functionally bilingual, moving between Inuktitut and English depending on context, though Inuktitut remains the primary language of home and community interaction for most families. Language preservation carries particular urgency in small Arctic communities like Grise Fiord, where the pressures of broader Canadian society, transmitted through television, internet, educational systems designed around English language instruction, and the frequent necessity of dealing with government and commercial institutions that operate exclusively or primarily in English, can gradually erode the everyday use of Indigenous languages among younger generations if active, conscious effort is not made to maintain and strengthen them. The Nunavut Territory itself, established in 1999 as Canada's newest territory through one of the largest land claim settlements in Canadian history, has made Inuktitut an official language of government alongside English and French, and Inuit cultural values are embedded within the territory's governance philosophy through the concept of Inuit Kaujimajatukongit, often abbreviated as IQ, which refers to the comprehensive body of traditional Inuit knowledge, values, and ways of knowing that inform how Nunavut's government attempts to approach policy and decision-making. For communities like Grise Fiord, this broader territorial framework represents a significant, if imperfect, attempt to create governance structures that reflect and support Inuit cultural identity in ways that the previous federal administrative regime rarely prioritized. The physical setting of Grise Fiord is genuinely extraordinary, even by the dramatic standards of the Canadian Arctic. The community sits at the foot of mountains that rise steeply from the fjord's edge, their peaks capped with glacial ice that gleams blue and white against the dramatic Arctic sky. The fjord itself stretches away to the north, its surface frozen for much of the year into a flat expanse of sea ice that serves as a highway for hunters, a landing surface for snowmobiles, and a landscape feature so fundamental to the community's existence that changes in its thickness, timing, and reliability carry immediate and significant implications for daily life and safety. In summer, when the ice retreats, the fjord becomes navigable for the small boats used for hunting and fishing, its waters reflecting the long golden light of an Arctic summer where the sun does not set for weeks at a time, circling endlessly above the horizon in a phenomenon as disorienting in its way as the polar night that precedes it. That polar night, the extended period of winter darkness, that is among the most immediately striking and psychologically significant features of life in the high Arctic, deserves careful attention and unhurried explanation, because it shapes daily existence in Grise Fiord in ways that penetrate far deeper than the simple practical challenge of darkness. At this latitude, the sun sets in mid-October and does not rise again above the horizon until late February or early March, a period of roughly 4 months during which the community exists in complete darkness, or, at best, a few hours each day of dim twilight around midday that provides minimal practical illumination. This is not the gentle, romantic darkness of a country night or even the ordinary darkness of a northern city in December. It is an absolute, encompassing, months-long absence of the most fundamental environmental cue that human biology uses to regulate nearly every aspect of physiological function, from sleep and wakefulness to hormone production to mood regulation. The biological impacts of extended polar night on human health and well-being are real, documented, and taken seriously by the residents who live through them each year. Disruption to circadian rhythms, the body's internal clock calibrated over millions of years of evolution to the regular alternation of day and night, is essentially universal among high Arctic residents during polar night, leading to patterns of sleep difficulty, fatigue, and altered appetite that differ from person to person but affect virtually everyone to some degree. Seasonal affective disorder, a form of depression specifically linked to reduced light exposure, is more prevalent in communities like Grise Fiord than in more southerly locations, and the community's health services maintain awareness of and attention to mental health needs throughout the dark season. Light therapy lamps, which simulate some aspects of natural sunlight exposure, are used by many residents as a practical tool for managing the biological effects of extended darkness, one of the more striking examples of how modern technology is applied to the very specific challenges of life in the high Arctic. Yet the polar night is also, for many residents, something more nuanced than simply a period of hardship to be endured. People who have grown up in Grise Fiord or spent many years there often speak of the winter darkness with a complexity that surprises people from more southerly locations, expecting simple accounts of misery and deprivation. The darkness has its own particular beauty, most strikingly in the aurora borealis, the northern lights, which appear with extraordinary frequency and intensity in the high Arctic sky during winter months, painting the darkness with shifting curtains of green, purple, and white light in displays that residents who have watched them throughout their lives still describe with genuine wonder. The darkness also carries its own quality of quiet, of stillness, of a particular intimacy within the community that several residents have described as one of the things they miss most when they spend time in the south during winter. When the only light comes from the windows of neighbors' homes across the snow, the sense of community connection can feel, paradoxically, more vivid and more present than at other times of year. Community life in Grise Fiord revolves substantially around the co-op store, which functions as the community's primary commercial institution and serves a role far broader than that of a simple retail establishment. The store, operated as part of the Arctic Cooperatives Network that serves Inuit communities across the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, stocks food, household goods, basic hardware, clothing, and a range of other necessities whose presence in such a remote location represents a genuine logistical achievement. Nearly everything sold in the store has traveled an extraordinary distance to get there, arriving either by sea lift, the annual summer cargo ship delivery that brings the bulk of the community's heavy goods and non-perishable supplies for the year, or by air freight aboard the small planes that provide the community's only year-round connection to the outside world when the sea is frozen. The sea lift is one of the most significant events in the annual calendar of any high Arctic community, and in Grise Fiord, this significance is amplified by the particularly remote location and the particularly narrow window of summer, during which sea ice conditions permit ship access to the area. For several weeks each summer, cargo ships travel through Arctic waters, delivering goods ordered months in advance by the community, the co-op, individual families, and various local institutions. Snowmobiles, building materials, appliances, heavy equipment, fuel, furniture, and years' worth of carefully planned bulk purchases of non-perishable food all arrive aboard these ships, to be unloaded and stored before the ice returns and cuts off sea access for another long winter. Experienced Grise Fiord residents have a practical sophistication about advanced planning and bulk purchasing that would seem almost alien to someone from a city where any needed item can be obtained within hours of the decision to purchase it. Running out of a critical item in midwinter in Grise Fiord is not merely inconvenient, it is potentially a serious problem requiring air freight at significant cost or simply going without until conditions improve enough to permit resupply. Air travel to and from Grise Fiord operates through a small gravel airstrip that accommodates the type of small propeller aircraft that serve communities throughout the high Arctic, primarily Twin Otter and Dash 8 type aircraft, capable of landing on short, unprepared surfaces in a wide range of conditions. Scheduled flights connect the community to Resolute Bay, the nearest hub community on Cornwallis Island, from which connections to Iqaluit, the territorial capital, and eventually to southern Canada can be made, though the full journey from Grise Fiord to a major southern city typically involves multiple legs, layovers, and travel times measured in many hours even when everything proceeds smoothly. When weather delays or mechanical issues interrupt this already limited flight schedule, the community's connection to the outside world is suspended entirely, a situation that occurs regularly throughout the year, particularly during the volatile weather conditions of autumn and early winter, when severe storms can ground flights for multiple days at a time. The cost of air travel to and from Grise Fiord is a matter of significant practical consequence for residents, with fares reflecting both the limited competition on northern routes and the high operational costs of flying small aircraft in extreme Arctic conditions. Medical evacuation, travel for specialized services unavailable in the community, and the routine trips south that many residents need to make for a wide range of purposes, carry financial implications that bear heavily on household budgets, already stretched by the high cost of everything in the community. Nunavut's food subsidy programs and various cost of living support measures address some of this financial pressure, but the fundamental economic reality of living in one of the most expensive and logistically demanding places in Canada remains a constant feature of life in Grise Fiord. Food security is a topic of intense and ongoing importance in Grise Fiord, shaped by the intersection of store-bought food costs, the logistical realities of remote resupply, and the continued practice of traditional Inuit hunting and gathering that has always been central to both nutritional survival and cultural continuity in the high Arctic. Store-bought food in remote northern communities like Grise Fiord cost dramatically more than equivalent products in southern Canada, with the price gap reflecting transportation costs, limited competition, and the particular challenges of maintaining cold chain integrity for perishable goods traveling to the high Arctic by small aircraft. A bag of apples, a jug of milk, a package of fresh vegetables, all of these represent significant expenditures relative to what the same items would cost in Ottawa or Toronto, and for families operating on limited incomes in a community with very few formal employment opportunities, these costs create genuine, serious food security challenges. This is one of the primary reasons why traditional country food, the Inuktitut term for traditionally harvested food, including Arctic char, caribou, muskox, seal, and various other wildlife species, remains so fundamentally important to daily life and nutritional health in Grise Fiord and communities like it across the Arctic. Traditional food is not simply a cultural preference or a sentimental connection to ancestral practice, though it is certainly both of those things. It is also the most nutritionally dense, locally available, and cost-effective food source accessible to the community, providing a range of nutrients, particularly fat-soluble vitamins and omega-3 fatty acids, that are essential for health in the Arctic climate, and that store-bought food provides incompletely or at prohibitive cost. A successful hunting trip that brings back a caribou or a significant catch of Arctic char provides nutrition for multiple families across multiple weeks, and the sharing of country food through established networks of reciprocal exchange remains one of the most important and actively maintained social practices in the community. Hunting in the high Arctic requires a sophisticated body of knowledge, physical capability, and material preparation that represents one of humanity's most refined adaptations to extreme environmental conditions. Hunters in Grise Fiord must understand the behavior, seasonal movements, and habitat preferences of multiple prey species across a vast and extremely challenging landscape, reading ice conditions, weather signs, and animal tracks in ways that draw on knowledge accumulated over many generations and communicated through ongoing practice, observation, and explicit teaching, rather than written documentation. The safety skills required for travel on sea ice in the high Arctic are in themselves a body of knowledge extensive enough to occupy a lifetime of learning, as conditions that appear stable can change with terrifying rapidity, and the consequences of misjudging ice thickness or condition in a remote location, far from any possibility of rapid rescue, are potentially fatal. Modern hunters in Grise Fiord use a blend of traditional knowledge and contemporary technology that represents a practical adaptation typical of indigenous communities across the Arctic and subarctic regions. Snowmobiles have replaced dog teams for most travel purposes, dramatically extending the range and speed at which hunters can move across the landscape compared to what was possible with traditional dog sled transportation, though at the cost of a dependence on fuel and mechanical parts that must themselves be imported at considerable expense and logistical complexity. Rifles have replaced many traditional hunting implements for the actual killing of game, though traditional methods and equipment, including certain types of hunting approaches and strategies, continue to be used and taught as both practically effective and culturally important. GPS navigation devices and satellite communication equipment have added significant safety margins for hunters operating in extremely remote terrain, providing the ability to call for help and communicate precise location information in emergencies that would previously have depended entirely on the hunter's own resources and the eventual search effort of a concerned community. Dog teams, while no longer the primary means of transportation for most hunters, have not disappeared entirely from Grise Fiord, and maintaining sled dogs carries both practical and deeply cultural significance for families who keep them. Dogs provide a means of travel that does not depend on fuel, that can navigate through poor visibility conditions that would make snowmobile travel extremely dangerous, and that can sense and avoid dangerous ice conditions through behavioral cues that an experienced musher learns to read and trust. Beyond these practical considerations, sled dogs are woven throughout Inuit cultural tradition in ways that go far deeper than simple utility, connected to narratives, relationships, and practices that have been part of Arctic Inuit life for centuries and that represent a form of living cultural heritage whose maintenance has its own intrinsic value, quite apart from any immediate practical calculation. The hunting of marine mammals, particularly ringed seal and bearded seal, remains central to both the nutritional and cultural life of Grise Fiord. Though marine mammal hunting in the Canadian Arctic has existed within a context made more complicated by international controversy over seal hunting that reached its peak in earlier decades, and continues to have lasting effects on the market for seal products and, more broadly, on outside perceptions of this practice. For Inuit hunters and communities, seal hunting is not the commercially driven industry that attracted the most intense opposition from animal welfare organizations. It is a subsistence practice of fundamental nutritional and cultural importance. Governed by Inuit ethical traditions regarding respectful and appropriate relationships with hunted animals, and representing one of the primary means by which families in communities like Grise Fiord supplement expensive store-bought food with locally available, culturally significant, and highly nutritious traditional food. The lingering effects of international anti-seal hunting campaigns, which did not distinguish carefully between industrial and subsistence hunting practices, have created economic and social complications for Inuit communities that remain a source of legitimate grievance and ongoing advocacy at various levels of Canadian and international governance. The wildlife of Ellesmere Island and the surrounding marine environment represents an extraordinary concentration of Arctic biodiversity that shapes the daily lives, nutritional resources, and cultural imagination of Grise Fiord residents in ways that are difficult to fully convey to someone whose relationship with wildlife is primarily mediated through nature documentaries and occasional park visits. Polar bears are a genuine and regular presence in and around the community, their movements tracked with serious attention by residents who understand that these animals represent both a significant danger and a profound cultural and ecological significance inseparable from the high Arctic landscape. Narwhals pass through the waters of Jones Sound seasonally, their presence historically marking a time of intense hunting activity and significant food acquisition for communities along their migration route. Muskox graze on the tundra surrounding the community in numbers that vary seasonally and across years, representing an important hunting resource whose management has become increasingly collaborative between Inuit communities and territorial wildlife managers. Arctic foxes appear regularly around the community, their winter white coats shifting to brown as summer arrives, their presence close to human settlement accepted with a matter-of-fact familiarity that reflects generations of coexistence between this community and the wildlife of the surrounding landscape. The landscape of Ellesmere Island itself exerts a profound influence on daily life and psychological experience in Grise Fiord that goes beyond the practical challenges of cold, darkness, and logistical difficulty. The island is geologically dramatic in ways that even photographs fail to fully capture, with mountain ranges rising sharply from fjord edges, glaciers calving directly into coastal waters, and vast stretches of bare rock, permanent ice, and tundra vegetation creating vistas of extraordinary scale and austerity that have moved virtually everyone who has spent significant time there to some form of contemplative reflection on the smallness of human presence and the immensity of natural processes operating across timescales that make human history seem brief. For Grise Fiord residents, this landscape is not primarily a scenic backdrop to contemplate from a distance. It is a living, dynamic environment that they move through actively, read carefully, and maintain an ongoing, practical, intimate relationship with that has no real equivalent in the experience of people living in more heavily modified, urbanized landscapes further south. The tundra that covers much of Ellesmere Island's ice-free land surface is, contrary to initial appearances of barren simplicity, a richly diverse ecosystem supporting a range of plant species including various sedges, mosses, lichens, and low-flowering plants that burst into surprisingly vivid bloom during the brief Arctic summer, covering hillsides and valley floors with color that startles visitors and delights residents after the long monochrome winter. This tundra vegetation supports the herbivores, particularly caribou and muskox, that represent critical hunting resources for the community, and its health and extent are directly affected by the ongoing changes in Arctic climate that have been occurring with increasing intensity and consequence over recent decades. Climate change represents perhaps the single most consequential and rapidly evolving challenge facing Grise Fiord and the broader high Arctic environment in which it exists. The Arctic is warming at approximately 2 to 3 times the global average rate, a phenomenon sometimes called Arctic amplification. And the effects of this accelerated warming are already profoundly visible and practically significant across every aspect of the environment on which Grise Fiord depends. Sea ice, the fundamental platform on which so much of traditional Arctic life has been organized for thousands of years, is forming later in the autumn, breaking up earlier in the spring, becoming thinner and less reliable even in midwinter, and exhibiting an overall pattern of change that experienced hunters in the community can document from personal observation across their own lifetimes, comparing current conditions to those their parents and grandparents described as the norm of an earlier era. The practical implications of these changes for hunting safety are immediate and serious. Ice that hunters' grandparents could rely on as being of safe thickness at a particular time of year cannot be assumed to meet those same standards today, and the accumulated generational knowledge about when and where ice travel is safe requires constant updating and recalibration in ways that would not have been necessary when the environment was more stable and predictable. Several communities across the Arctic have experienced tragedies in recent years connected to ice conditions proving unexpectedly dangerous for hunters who relied on historical knowledge that no longer accurately described current reality. A deeply disturbing reminder of how rapidly the environmental foundations of traditional safety knowledge are shifting. Changes in wildlife species distribution and behavior, driven by shifting climate conditions, are also being observed by hunters and community members in Grise Fiord, with some species appearing in new areas or at new times of year, others becoming less predictably available in locations where they were historically reliable, and entirely new species beginning to appear occasionally in the high Arctic as ranges shift northward. These changes challenge traditional ecological knowledge in ways that require both adaptation and active intergenerational communication to address as elders who hold extensive traditional knowledge about wildlife behavior must work alongside younger hunters observing environmental conditions the elders themselves have never encountered. Infrastructure in Grise Fiord is modest, shaped by the practical realities and financial constraints of maintaining services in such an extreme and remote location. The community is served by a hamlet office, providing local government administration, a health center staffed by community health nurses, and visited periodically by physicians flown in from Iqaluit, a school serving all students from kindergarten through secondary level, a water treatment and sewage system adapted to permafrost conditions, and the electrical generation system that provides power to the community through diesel generators, with fuel stored in tanks that must themselves be replenished by the annual sea lift. The cost of providing and maintaining this basic infrastructure at this location is extraordinarily high per capita compared to virtually any other Canadian community, a reality that carries significant implications for ongoing negotiations between the hamlet of Grise Fiord, the Nunavut territorial government, and the federal government about funding responsibilities and levels. Housing in Grise Fiord is a subject of significant and ongoing concern, reflecting a broader housing crisis across Nunavut that is particularly acute in small, remote communities where construction costs are extremely high, building materials must be shipped in at great expense, and the technical challenges of building on permafrost add additional complexity and cost to everything from foundation design to utility installation. Many families in Grise Fiord live in overcrowded conditions, with extended family members sharing homes in ways that reflect both cultural traditions of extended family living and the simple practical reality that adequate housing for every family in the community does not currently exist. Overcrowding in housing is associated with a range of adverse health outcomes, from increased transmission of respiratory infections to psychological stress effects, and addressing this housing shortage represents one of the most pressing policy priorities for both the territorial and federal governments as they develop northern community support programs. The school in Grise Fiord serves children across a wide range of ages in a single-school, multi-grade context that is typical of small Arctic communities and that presents both genuine pedagogical challenges and some distinctive advantages. Teachers posted to Grise Fiord, most of whom come from southern Canada, and are typically young people drawn by the adventure and professional experience of teaching in an extreme and unusual setting, must be skilled at managing multi-grade classrooms while also developing the cultural awareness and communication skills needed to work effectively with Inuit students in a community whose cultural context differs fundamentally from Southern Canadian educational norms. Teacher turnover is a persistent challenge in Northern communities generally, as the combination of isolation, limited amenities, and the difficulty of building deep community connections in a short time means that many teachers complete 1 or 2 contracts and then return south, limiting the continuity of educational relationships that research consistently identifies as important for student learning and well-being. Efforts to make education more relevant to Inuit cultural context and traditional knowledge systems are ongoing across Nunavut, with curriculum development initiatives attempting to integrate Inuktitut language instruction, traditional knowledge content, and culturally grounded approaches to learning alongside the conventional academic subjects required by the territorial curriculum. In Grise Fiord, where the community's small size and the strength of family-based transmission of traditional knowledge provide particular opportunities, some of the most effective educational experiences happen outside the formal school building entirely, when elders and experienced hunters work with young people on the land, transmitting the knowledge of ice reading, animal behavior, weather interpretation, and survival skills that have always been the core educational curriculum of Arctic Inuit life. Healthcare in Grise Fiord is delivered through a challenging combination of limited on-site nursing services and a strong dependence on medical evacuation to Iqaluit, or for more serious cases, to hospitals in southern Canada for anything beyond basic primary care and emergency stabilization. The community health nurses stationed in Grise Fiord provide a wide range of services, including routine care, chronic disease management, maternal and child health, and emergency response, serving as the front line of a healthcare system that requires these nurses to operate with a scope of practice and level of independent clinical judgment considerably beyond what their counterparts in more southerly, well-resourced communities would typically be expected to exercise. Telemedicine, using video consultation technology to connect patients and local health workers with specialist physicians in Iqaluit and southern Canada, has significantly improved the ability to access medical expertise remotely, though the limitations of what can be assessed and managed without physical examination and advanced diagnostic equipment remain significant. Mental health is a topic of particular importance in Grise Fiord and across high Arctic communities generally, connected to the effects of extended polar night, the challenges of isolation, historical trauma connected to colonial policies, including the relocation program that established the community, socioeconomic stressors, and the particular psychological demands of living in an environment where the margins of safety are narrow and the support systems available in larger communities are absent or limited. Mental health services are among the most difficult to deliver effectively in remote Arctic communities, requiring sustained investment in both professional services and community-based support systems that can address the full range of needs across a population experiencing stressors that differ significantly from those driving mental health challenges in southern communities. Substance use is a challenge in Grise Fiord, as in many remote northern communities, connected to a complex combination of historical trauma, limited economic opportunity, social isolation, and the particular stressors of community life in extreme conditions. The community has at various times grappled with questions about alcohol availability and control, with the Nunavut system of community-level control over alcohol sales and consumption, allowing local governments to implement restrictions that reflect community wishes about managing alcohol-related harm. The interplay between individual freedom, community well-being, cultural tradition, and the practical realities of addiction in a small, remote community with limited treatment access creates genuinely difficult policy questions that communities like Grise Fiord navigate continuously, without easy answers, and with direct, visible consequences for family well-being when approaches prove inadequate. The governance of Grise Fiord operates through the hamlet of Grise Fiord, a municipal government structure with an elected mayor and council responsible for managing local services and representing community interests to the Nunavut territorial government. This level of local governance sits within the broader structure of Nunavut's political system, which includes the Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated Organization representing Inuit beneficiaries of the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, the Nunavut Legislative Assembly where elected members from ridings across the territory make territorial law, and the federal government in Ottawa, whose responsibilities include substantial funding for northern community infrastructure, services, and cost of living supports. The Qikiqtani Inuit Association represents Inuit interests specifically across the Qikiqtalik region, which includes Grise Fiord, providing another layer of advocacy and service delivery that addresses issues specific to the Baffin region communities. Land claims under the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, signed in 1993, and representing the largest Aboriginal land claim settlement in Canadian history, to that point, established a framework of rights and benefits for Nunavut Inuit that includes specific provisions around land ownership, resource revenue sharing, wildlife management co-governance, and government employment equity that are intended to ensure Inuit participation in and benefit from decisions affecting their territory. For a community like Grise Fiord, these provisions have practical daily significance, shaping how decisions about wildlife management, resource development on lands around the community, and government hiring are made, and who has meaningful input into them. Economic life in Grise Fiord is constrained by the community's size and remote location in ways that make conventional employment-based economic models difficult to sustain. Government and public service employment through positions with the Hamlet administration, health center, school, and various territorial and federal government programs represents the primary source of formal wage income for the community's working-age residents. Beyond this public sector employment, opportunities for formal wage work are limited, with the small scale of the local economy and the difficulties of operating a private business in such a remote and costly environment, meaning that entrepreneurial activity, while present, exists on a modest scale. The arts have provided both cultural expression and economic opportunity for Grise Fiord residents, as for Inuit communities across the Arctic, with a tradition of carving in local stone, printmaking, and other traditional and contemporary art forms generating both cultural significance and, through the sale of artwork through cooperative and commercial channels, meaningful supplementary income for artisan families. Inuit art from the high Arctic communities commands genuine respect and, in some cases, significant market prices in southern Canada and internationally, representing one of the more successful examples of how traditional cultural practice can be sustained through market recognition of its artistic and cultural value. The imagery in Grise Fiord art draws heavily on the community's daily reality, the wildlife of the surrounding environment, hunting activities and traditional practices, the dramatic Arctic landscape, and figures from Inuit legend and spiritual tradition, creating a body of visual work that documents and celebrates the particular experience of life in the high Arctic in a way that written records alone cannot fully achieve. The social fabric of Grise Fiord is woven tightly by the necessities of small community life, where everyone knows everyone else, and the practical requirements of mutual survival create bonds of interdependence that complement cultural traditions of communal sharing and cooperative effort. Decisions that might in a larger community be handled through impersonal market mechanisms, from who helps with a construction project to how a successful hunt's bounty is distributed, are managed in Grise Fiord through networks of personal relationship, kinship obligation, and cultural expectation that reflect Inuit social values emphasizing collective well-being alongside individual responsibility. These networks can be a source of profound support and resilience, ensuring that families in difficult circumstances are not left to struggle alone, and can also create the particular social pressures and constraints that inevitably accompany life in a community small enough that genuine privacy is essentially unavailable, and every personal difficulty becomes, at some level, a community awareness. The arrival of internet connectivity, while still limited in quality and expensive compared to southern Canadian standards, has transformed aspects of daily life in Grise Fiord in ways that are both genuinely positive and raise complex questions about cultural impact. Young people in the community can now access the same social media, streaming entertainment, and online information that young people anywhere in Canada experience, creating a degree of cultural connection to broader Canadian society that did not exist when their parents were growing up. This connectivity provides windows on the world, access to educational resources, and means of maintaining relationships with family and friends elsewhere that are genuinely valuable, particularly for a community where face-to-face interaction with the wider world is so limited by logistics and cost. At the same time, the influence of digital media and mainstream Canadian popular culture flowing into Grise Fiord through internet access creates complex dynamics around language, values, and cultural priorities for young people navigating between the traditional culture maintained by elders and the broader Canadian youth culture they encounter online. These tensions are not unique to Grise Fiord. They are universal to Indigenous communities engaged in the ongoing project of cultural survival in a world where the dominant surrounding culture has enormous technological reach and commercial sophistication. But they take a particular form in the high Arctic, where the traditional culture being navigated alongside mainstream influences is itself so distinctive and so deeply adapted to a specific, extreme environment that its maintenance requires active, conscious, and sustained effort at every level, from individual family choice to territorial education policy. The relationship of Grise Fiord residents with the broader world beyond their community takes forms specific to their location and circumstances. Many residents have family members in other Nunavut communities, particularly Resolute Bay and Pond Inlet, which have historic connections to Grise Fiord through the relocation program and subsequent family formation across communities. Travel between these communities, while expensive and logistically complex, maintains family bonds across the geography of the high Arctic, in patterns that reflect the traditional mobility of Inuit groups across vast Arctic territories before the settlement of permanent communities became the norm. Some residents have experience of life in southern Canada through education, work, or medical treatment, and maintain connections to southern cities that provide a complex dual perspective on the enormous contrasts between high Arctic community life and the urbanized South. Tourism to Grise Fiord is extremely limited by comparison to the visitor numbers that larger and more accessible communities attract, with the combination of high travel costs, limited accommodation, and challenging logistics meaning that only a small number of particularly dedicated and well